everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to start by thanking all of you guys for being here with us today. This is a group of students who went to Poland over spring break, and they're going to tell you a little bit about their experience and then open up for questions towards the end. So I do want to let you guys know if you didn't grab lunch, you can do so at any point throughout the presentation, or if on your way out is more convenient, feel free to do that. Thank you so much, and please help me welcome these.
I love that I was confused for a student. Let's just keep that all in your mind. So first off, I want to thank the American Democracy Project for having us here today and for providing lunch for everyone. So let's give the American Democracy Project and Grace and Madison an applause for all the work that they do, right? That's awesome. And then also thank the students for joining me here today that went on the trip, both on the panel, and I see a few out in the audience as well that went to Poland. For those of you who don't know, my name is Dr. Nickell, and I am an assistant professor of history here at Fort Hays State University. And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about the study abroad trip that we did to Poland over spring break, which was part of a class called Jewish Life Before, During, and After the Holocaust, which we're teaching in the history department this semester. So these students are still embroiled in Jewish life, at least for another few weeks. And the conception of this course was really intended to help students who are less familiar with aspects of Jewish life familiarize themselves with Jewish religious practice and culture and life and experience prior to the Holocaust, then learn about the Holocaust in depth, and then continue that through with developing an understanding about what happened in Poland after the Holocaust. So students read extensively and discussed extensively prior to departing for Poland. And this is the most I'm going to talk this whole time. I want to now just take a moment to kind of open this up with students. And just so you know, the format today is going to be what we call a round table, even though this is not round, right? But I'm just going to kind of shoot questions out there, and then students are going to answer them. I have a couple prepared questions, but I would really prefer that for the remainder of the time you have questions. Otherwise, I can go for days. Everyone here knows that already, right? So the first question I really have is, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are in Fort Hays, what your major is, what year you are, and then maybe why you decided to spend your spring break learning about the Holocaust?
Okay. So I'm Erin Adams. I am a first-year graduate student here at Fort Hays, the history department, and I chose to spend my spring break abroad in Poland, A, because I was chomping at the bit to get out of Kansas, especially after COVID, and B, the subject matter of the course is something that I've only had maybe a surface-level understanding of the Holocaust, and especially Jewish life. So combining those two things together, I mean, it's really a fantastic experience and opportunity that I'm glad I went to go on.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Hoy. I am history and education as my majors. I'm only second year here at Fort Hays, and the big reason why I went on the trip is I really like traveling, and it's very interesting to see how you can see history in these places abroad, and how to almost take this knowledge back and how to teach it in a classroom.
I'm Ashlynn Kelly. I'm a third-year undergrad, and I really wanted to go because I've never traveled outside of the United States, so I thought it would be a great opportunity to travel abroad, because I know that's something I would want to do possibly in the future again, because it was just so much fun. And going with a group of history majors to see places that we learn about in person was really why I wanted to go.
I'm Joanna Lockwood. I'm also a first-year graduate student in the history program and serve as one of the GTAs up there as well. I was super excited to take this trip, not only to get the travel experience, be able to go to abroad for the first time, but also be able to connect those experiences both in the classroom and in the trip physically.
Okay, beautiful. And just a reminder, you've got to project your voices. I know sometimes students are not used to using the teacher voice, so if at all you can't hear in the back, filtering to throw things, just not food, right? You got me back there. All right, cool. So the next question I really wanted to kind of follow up with is, we went to a lot of places, right? We went to Krakow, we went to Warsaw, we went to Oświęcim, and then we also went to Auschwitz. Of all of the places that we went to, what was the place that really impacted you the most? And I know that we're going to kind of fold through slides in a disorganized manner to get to the right places, but we want to make sure that you have visuals when we're talking about these things.
I can go first.
Sure.
Slides are first. Yeah, it works, yeah. So one of the places that really resonated with me throughout the trip is just kind of this absence and these traces of history as we walk around these areas. My pictures here show synagogues and previous synagogues in the city of Krakow, Poland, and these really resonated with me. Not only the still practicing synagogue, as we can see in the middle, but these synagogues that were destroyed or renovated during the Second World War and turned into ammo bunkers or storage or these other non-synagogue uses, and now they serve as apartment buildings or bookstores as well. Being able to see this architecture as well as just kind of this absence was something really that resonated with me during the trip. Also, one of the more physical traces we see here is the mezuzah trace, which, if you're not familiar with that, is a piece that hangs outside the doorway of many Jewish homes. It's a big part of, this is a part of their culture and religion that really blesses the home, and they touch it as they exit each day, and it really just resonates with their culture. But being able to see the absence of these pieces really just helps to fulfill that absence there as well. Oh, and sorry, I forgot this picture was in here. Also, another place that we visited within Krakow was a former kosher butcher in kind of a central location. It was more of a food market as we see it today, with many different types of food. But originally, this was in the historic Jewish district where they would go and get their meat products and different things at the butcher. So just being able to be surrounded in this presence, which was used to be this vibrant Jewish community, full of population, and now be able to see it today was just a very beneficial factor to take from the readings and see in person too. One of the really important kind of cultural aspects that we saw, not only the absence but also the modern culture and how it's trying to be kind of rebuilt or anything like that, was in the JCC, which is the Jewish Community Center, which I think Erin wanted to talk about a little bit as well.
Yeah. I think one of the more impactful, positively impactful things in going over to Poland was seeing the contemporary Jewish communities, how they are surviving after the Holocaust. They're small communities, but they provide, the JCC provides a safe area for those looking to explore and rediscover their heritage as they've lost it after the Holocaust. And there was another place in Svensham, the cafe, that will come up later as well. Places like that where, yeah, it's somewhere there. Places like that where you have people who are doing the work to preserve this history and to preserve this history going forward, to go create outreach groups, not only for those who are Jewish, but for LGBTQ individuals, for Ukrainian refugees, for those fleeing Russia. Just a lot of outreach, seeing what they do in the day-to-day is something really impactful.
That's a great point. Also being able to see how this heritage has been traced in the modern day as well. Modern individuals finding their genealogy, finding their family heritage maybe for the first time in their life, and how they're able to connect with that community in the modern space is really impactful as well.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the Jewish cemeteries that we went to. So we went to one in Krakow, Warsaw, and Svensham. And so these ones are very impactful to me because they're all, like as you can see in this picture, they're just completely stacked on top of each other, covered in moss and leaves and things like that. And they're very different from cemeteries I've seen here in the U.S. They're not well preserved, but even though it's beautiful to see them looking like this, it's also sad and eerie to see that like the Jewish community was completely like taken away, and so they didn't have anybody to take care of these spaces. And so this picture is from the Warsaw one, which is I think the largest one that we went to. Right? And so I know Joanna and I walked through it together, and we didn't even get through half of it. There's just so many there, and all of our discussions were just of looking at the tombstones and being like, I wonder what this symbol means. Oh, like seeing all the different languages on the front of the tombstones. And then also we took a like moment of silence to just stand in the middle of the cemetery, and like it's very quiet, yet you can hear like the busy life outside of the walls and the traffic and everything. So even in the middle of this big city, there's this preservation of the Jewish culture.
A nice trend you hear with all of us is how we're able to go to these places even physically and see the change from what we do in our readings to also what we do, or is in the readings and how we see life and how people interact. Right here is Plasha, which it's not a typical, it's tried concentration camp, none of us really hear that much. For Schindler's List, it was a concentration camp in Schindler's List. It is out there, it's in Krakow, pardon me. As you can see, it was snowing, so the weather was very changing on our different days in Poland. But through the 3 different pictures, you see how this place was built. It was torn down and made almost, you can see, almost as if it's a park now. We saw a gentleman jogging in shorts outside at the park, or at the place, which is interesting. Going out for a jog in the snow and walking dogs, where it acts more like a park in this town or in the city instead of a site of memorial. And moving on to memorial as well, I think this just shows a great deal of how it looks interpretation-wise throughout Poland, through when they're occupied through the Soviets, just through the Cold War as well. You have the bigger memorial that is erected during when the Soviets had control over Poland, where it focused more on the idea that Polish people in general disassociate the entirety of Jewish life out of it, and seeing how this is memorialized in a giant memorial that looks over the city, and how if you look closely on the bottom, you see flowers and candles and stuff like that at the base, which is more of you see in Christianity faiths of doing with memorialization, or for memorials. And then the other one is just a tiny plaque dedicated to the Jewish life who died in the concentration camp, and how smaller it is, and how it was made at a later date, with how it's very little semblance of rocks, which is you can say the Jewish version of flowers to leave at memorials. It was very changing how you can see this life and how the active change of learning how to memorialize these horrific events are shaping the landscape as well.
And we have a couple more places to run through on here. Do you want to take this one, Erin?
Yeah, sure. So this one, the Oneg Shabbat, that was in Warsaw. And we had watched a documentary before leaving for Poland, documenting sort of the resistance movements through collection of Nazi war crimes. So like evidence, like newspaper clippings, edicts, things like that, and how they were preserved. Before we had gone to this place, which was located just in the center of, surrounded by like an apartment building, kind of just in the middle of the city, we had gone to the Warsaw Uprising Museum, and we had seen just how completely flattened and devastated the landscape of Warsaw was after the war. And having this, being able to find this after the war, is one of the strongest things that we have currently for Holocaust and documenting Nazi war crimes. And just to have that being kind of like in the middle, I mean, it was roughly the size of like half of this square right here, just a little bunker containing all of this stuff. And it's just a very interesting experience to be able to go and see that and to juxtapose that against the physical and current landscape that Warsaw is today.
And for those of you that are interested in the documentary, this documentary is called Who Will Write Our History? And it's about the Ringelblum Archive, or the Oneg Shabbat Archive, which was essentially an effort by Jews inside of the Warsaw Ghetto to preserve their memory. So they buried documents hoping that they would be unearthed after the war to tell the Jewish side of the experience. So this is the site where it was buried.
And then the other ones maybe under the Chinese embassy?
Yeah, they're guessing the other one's under the Chinese embassy. Unfortunately, right now, they're not letting the Poles dig under the Chinese embassy for some reason. And then, do you want to cover this one, maybe Ashlynn?
So this was the old synagogue in Osvenstrom that we went to. Our tour guide was awesome.
He was cool.
He was very interactive and great at telling the history of the building and of the Jewish community in Osvenstrom before the war, because it's not there now, and that is the city right outside of Auschwitz. So I think it's still in. People still practicing? Yeah. So we got to go inside, and then we also toured just the town around, and we went down to the river, and we also walked to the Osvenstrom Cemetery, which was very different from the ones in Krakow and Warsaw. They actually have a groundskeeper who volunteers to take care of it. So the cemetery there, they're all lined up, and it's very clean and nice. So it was nice to see somebody taking the initiative to clean up someplace like that compared to the other ones.
Our tour guide was actually Austrian.
Oh, yes.
So he was doing his year of service. They have mandatory service. He was doing his year of service as a tour guide, educating people about the Holocaust. And on that note, speaking of Austrians, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so I can see really quick, all of us are actually in this photo, which we realized after the fact's a nice touch. But yes, we met a friend named Oscar there, and he was actually a cool kind of story. We were just touring one of the cemeteries, and yes, in Krakow, and we were just wandering around, and he was during the class, we were all supposed to essentially learn about a location and give a mini tour about the location. So it was kind of like lingering in the background, just trying to get the free tour that we all kind of do sometimes. And then Dr. Nickell just invited him to hang out with us, and we ended up walking we ended up walking to the bigger cemetery in Krakow with him, and even stopping for lunch. And this is when he sadly had to leave to meet his friend who's doing military service and meeting up with them. So this is after lunch, and we just met a friend from Austria there that just kind of followed us around, and we got to meet him. He ended up studying history as well, so it was a nice talking point.
Medical history.
Yeah.
I asked him why he was in Poland, and he was like, "Oh, I'm just here for the weekend visiting a friend." And I was like, that would be so cool to just hop on a train and go to a different country to meet with a friend. So.
And
He seemed to do it a lot as
Yeah.
well on the weekends.
Yeah.
He just plans this out and goes and visits different locations because it only takes a couple hours by train. Just being able to have that connectivity would be very nice as well.
and even how it's just interesting. I talked to Joanna a lot, how it's interesting. We have two people who speak two different main languages, first greet each other in that language, and then switch to English or a common language in order to kind of finish out the conversation, which is interesting.
So the final thing I'll have students talk to you about a little, and then we're going to open it up for questions, and feel free to ask anything you want. All of these students are super open, and as you can tell, none of us are excessively formal. So anything that you have questions about, feel free to ask. But the last thing I want to talk about is we did spend 2 days at Auschwitz-Birkenau. We spent 1 full day at Auschwitz I and 1 full day at Birkenau. So I was wondering if maybe each of you could reflect on those 2 days and what your takeaway was from that.
I think I'd go first. So we initially went into Auschwitz I that first day as a large group, and we followed our tour guide, she was amazing, by the way. Just a shout out to her, she's not here obviously, but after we had going through that all together, the exhibits, we had the opportunity to explore Auschwitz I on our own. And I ended up breaking away from the larger group, and I went to the Czechoslovak exhibit. And that one, I don't have any pictures of it because unfortunately I have an old camera and it doesn't really work in low lighting. But the way in which that Auschwitz constructs the exhibits is a really powerful and excellent way of modern history, especially for, there are a couple of standout exhibits, and the Czechoslovak one was excellent. As you walked in very quiet and respectful, many like statues, paintings, artworks from Holocaust survivors. You walk in and it's a wooden ramp, and you see the two, like, 10 Commandments, which is very quiet. And having that moment of solitude and quiet, and to just kind of think about Jewish experience, Jewish life and death in that alone was very, not poignant, but it was definitely something that I wrote about a lot in my personal writings. And then for the second day that we went, it's a good, like, maybe 15-20 minute walk just straight from the camp. You enter into this large and empty field where they have just kind of a memorial to all the victims who died at Auschwitz there in the gas chambers. And the land itself is just very quiet. You hear a lot of birds, things like that. And just kind of standing there at that empty field was disheartening in a way, but also a way in which I could understand, like, kind of the magnitude of this history. It was a good opportunity to kind of have that experience.
So when we were for our day one, kind of the same experience. We were in our group as a whole. We're walking around with a whole bunch of other different school groups and everything like that. I think the biggest thing that stood out with me for day one primarily was I was very prepared for the mounds of shoes we always hear about, and I went to the Holocaust Museum in DC, and they do the shoes there. It's the mounds of hair that was left behind as well that they just have there that I believe the tour guide said that they move around as well. So just trying to wrap that around my head, trying to think about another representation of just the death, the mass death that happened. As well as just the different countries and groups had their own different building to go into, and how each country dictates what's actually inside their building to memorialize, and seeing how the difference between Poland to the Netherlands to Austria, how they reflect themselves on the events of the Holocaust, with Poland being a lot more nationalism focused, since it was built during more of the Russia, and then Netherlands, which almost when you walked in, I feel the stereotype of the Netherlands being colorful, but for Austria you walk in and it was point blank saying we perpetrated this, it's our fault, and kind of saying this is on us, here's everything. You walk around saying documents, quotes, even to the point where there's monitors that you can look at names of victims and perpetrators for the at the Holocaust or Auschwitz specifically. Can't remember.
It's just Austria.
Well, I didn't know if it was the whole Holocaust or just
I think
Austria.
it's the whole Holocaust, but just Austria.
So the whole Holocaust, just Austrian. And then for day two, the thing that stood out for me more is the ruins everywhere, as well as just for a lot of these buildings, the only thing that remained were just the stone chimneys that were out there. So it's a clear field with just chimneys, and just the ruins of what is left of what was there, and how they were still planning to build more gas chambers and expanding on it before the Soviets came in.
For my day one experience, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was the room full of like evidence that they have left, so the shoes and the pots and pans and the suitcases and the prayer shawls and everything like that. It really, because you learn about this mass murder, and seeing it in person just really, like, I don't know, it's very emotional. And I also, when we walked through the gas chamber at Auschwitz that one was really, it's just crazy to think that people were doing this to other human beings. And for day two, when we walked down through like the main part to where they unloaded everyone and did the checking, and seeing the ruins was very sad. And I know that we had, I think 5 or 10 minutes to just sit and think about what we had seen there. But they also have a memorial in between the two ruined gas chambers, which I thought was very symbolic to that part. And like Erin said, they have a field kind of like in the back corner. It's much bigger than I expected it to be. But just to have these stones there saying like, this is where the ashes are of victims is, in just an open field, is so interesting. And I like how they've tried to, see the beauty in it of the nature, even though it's a site of horrific events. So.
Just to kind of touch on what these three have said, as well as kind of adding my own experiences. Day one at Auschwitz I, specifically within the materials and the shoes, the exhibits there, as well as the suitcases and the bags and the baskets that we saw with each of their names written on these bags. They expected to go back and retrieve their items, being able to see those, as well as one of the more permanent exhibits that they have at Auschwitz I they've now implemented is a room full of childhood drawings done by children of their experiences and of the camp. There was one specifically that I took a picture of. I'm sorry I don't have it here with me today, but it was of Auschwitz II Birkenau and kind of the main entrance of the train and the railroad track. Many of the drawings depicted railroad tracks, guards, and just kind of this movement. So to see it through children's eyes is also very impactful. Also, and then Auschwitz II, being able to see the landscape is something that I would have never just been able to do without being there, seeing how big and expansive it is, past this area that we kind of imagine in our heads of the barracks and the train tracks there, but even past the Soviet memorial that is standing today, to see these mass grave sites and these unfinished projects that they were planning to continue, was just something that had really resonated with me that I had never really thought about or been able to learn about without seeing it firsthand.
And I know for a lot of the students, the child drawings that you're talking about are actually in the Yad Vashem bunker. And there's a room where they kind of project on every single wall videos of Jewish life before the Holocaust. Smiling families, children having picnics, kids playing. And I know for a lot of folks this was one of their most impactful moments. It's very easy to just reduce Jewish people to numbers and to forget that these were living, breathing human beings. And in that moment where you're surrounded on all sides by this video, it reminds you. And so I know for a lot of students that was a really important moment. So I don't want to take all of this time with us just talking, because we can go for days. We did go for days, actually. I want to open it up to questions. And then, of course, please, Trace, keep it to questions or not too long comments so that students can answer as much as possible. Kevin?
I'm going to start right off with what Dr. Nickell brought up. I'd love to hear more about what you experienced about the diversity of Jewish life in Poland in the times you were studying. I'm Kevin Amadon. I'm professor of German culture and history, and so I have a certain optic on this from a lot of different angles. And one of those is this, that not only were Jewish people not simply numbers, but there was an extraordinary diversity within that cultural sphere. I'm just interested in what you experienced in that.
That's something that we got to learn about a lot in the class before we left for Poland. Is we got to see like the difference between shtetl, I can't pronounce it very well, and then going on to the various political movements and political views that a lot of Jews had, especially during like the late 1800s and the early 1900s as well, and getting to see that whole wide breadth of both urban, rural, politically diverse, just within Poland itself, was something really fascinating that really kind of it added color, more or less, to the whole experience, that it just made it a little bit more deeper.
Were there specific sites where you could see different kinds of Jewish communities in Poland itself? And evidence and documents and sites of their history?
Krakow in particular was one of the strongest places that we got to see remnants of Jewish history. both from the physical, like things that have been left behind, physically etched into the doorways, like where the mezuzahs had been ripped out, or former synagogues, just in so many places within Krakow, and even the graffiti on those former synagogues just kind of, it kind of showed more of the history looking back and seeing how people interact with these spaces is one thing that we really are talking about in this class.
I think it's, for physical representation, it's more of, and we did a reading about it when we got back as well, as just almost a commercialization of it as well in the area. For difference within, like, remaining wise, the JCC, which is a great, almost trying to unify and get more people out there, but as we're there, we see locations of a synagogue getting rebuilt, other ones where where the kosher butcher market was, we saw different types of synagogues surrounding it.
One thing that we also saw in Cashmere's, the market there is, I mean, as you said, the commercialization, but also where you have these antiques, where you have old menorahs, Stars of David's, right next to things of Nazi oppression, so like Nazi insignias or communist artifacts as well, and all of them just being openly sold just as is.
And pictures too.
Oh, yeah,
They have
pictures.
like pictures and other things like that you can buy. I don't know. I think you said like some of them aren't real.
Oh yeah, some of it's fake.
Yeah.
So people create fake Nazi things to sell to tourists all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was strange to like see those two things like right next to each other for people to buy. It was just, we were all a little like, that's a little weird.
This
Uneasy
invented
feeling.
tradition.
Yeah.
These are important things. Very good.
I would also just like to touch on kind of this after period in the modern, Jewish community that we discussed at the JCC. Something he touched on, which I think is interesting for that diverse kind of span within the community itself, is this ability to kind of participate and be a part of it as much as an individual chooses, especially if they're just finding about their heritage, and being able to feel a part of the community, but also not have to, completely, change their previous lifestyle or anything like that. They can be as part of as many of activities or religious events as they would like as well.
And even adding to that, we briefly mentioned on how how the family itself feels if an individual finds out and the other family members don't want to. It's they're still living back from Soviet oppression and just oppression entirely building up to feeling comfortable to be Jewish and stuff in the area. So.
Right on every tip of every tongue right now, Paul. It's fascinating. Thank you.
I will kind of add on to that students definitely were exposed to, say, for example, Hasidic communities for the first time in their lives. So I remember having to stop all the women on the corner and be like, you have to be very careful not to touch men as you're walking by them. And so that was definitely, I think, in Hays, Kansas, there's not a large Hasidic community unless I'm missing something,
Anywhere
right?
outside of Brooklyn.
So definitely different, more overtly religious Jews, but also secular Jews. How many synagogues on a block y'all want to guess, right? So we learned about different sects of Judaism. So I feel like the students they actually can talk about the rich diversity of Jewish life pretty well. So.
Thank you.
So I have a question kind of going back to the souvenir markets. So these are modern, made-up things. Are they trying to present them as being antique? Or is it just literally like, this is a souvenir market, buy a chopped?
So essentially the idea that it's used as a tourist industry.
Mm-hmm.
And when sending in images, I found out that I sent them to the wrong person through email, and I didn't realize it. But a lot of us recreated, or at least I did for a purpose, to recreate how everyone is taking pictures of iconic scenes and how it is very commercialized, and how if you go to an antique store, it's the same way of, ooh, I went to Poland, here's some World War II memorabilia I got as a souvenir antique I can bring home. And it's very sad, at least personally, to see that a market is built on just Nazi memorabilia next to Jewish ones that, if we're being honest, in order for them to gain all this, if they are real, they have to have been stolen during the Nazi occupation.
I think that's one of the big things, is that if it is fake, that's a whole different issue, but if they are genuine items, then they would have been items from those who have died. I mean, it's just stealing, taking, claiming these items, and then just passing them on to sell for tourists. And that's something that a lot of us found kind of sickening, or just kind of like off-putting.
I just wondered because, like, I know my grandfather, when he came back, he had trophies. So their pieces did survive.
Yeah.
But it was more of the, well, we conquered you and we're going to keep this so that we can remember that we defeated you aspect. But then it's like maybe younger generations are now trying to profit off of those artifacts.
These aren't really younger generations. Just to set the kind of scene, this is like an outdoor market, kind of like a flea market or a farmer's market. It's mostly old men who are setting up their like flea market goods, which include everything from, like magnets that say Krakow on them to actual remnants of Jewish life, which were stolen from Jewish victims, to actual Nazi remnants, to recreations of Nazi remnants. And this is because there is a market for this. People go to Poland to learn about World War II, and they consume World War II when they do it. But you guys could probably also talk a little bit about some of the other interesting things you saw for sale. Because this is a whole topic of historical debate right now, but maybe they can share a little bit of what they also saw for sale.
That night we were trying to find a bookmark from one of our professors. We happened into a little souvenir shop, and in that souvenir shop were, I think you called them lucky Jews, just magnets of like very stereotypical like presentations of Jewish culture with a little coin stuck in the middle, and that you just put right on your fridge, or figurines, keychains, all of that. If you guys want to elaborate more.
Exactly what you said there, and this is outside of a flea market. This is in a store where they also sell like Krakow t-shirts that we like to look at, and different magnets and things like that. But to be able to see this kind of, like you say, commercialization and just stereotypical depiction of these people, just to take home as a souvenir is something that we just kind of found unsettling. And every time we would see it in a store, it just kind of seemed repetitive, and these same depictions, and it was very uneasy to be able to see that in such kind of a elaborate store where, if you've ever been to like an I Heart New York, tourist shop, it was very much that setting of all of these different things that you can take home to your family and take home to remember your trip, and then having these in there as well was just kind of off-putting.
There's a chessboard too, right?
Yeah, there were chessboards.
Figurines and,
A death camp chess set, or?
No, this was like a Jewish chess set, but like little Jewish figurines with exacerbated physical characteristics. But at Auschwitz, what can you buy at Auschwitz?
Books.
Yeah.
Books.
And magnets with like the Arbeit macht frei. I don't know if anybody wants an Arbeit macht frei magnet, but it's also, it brings up these conversations, right?
Or they have like postcards with different pictures on it, and I'm like, I don't know if I would want to purchase the pictures. So.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Paul. So Nathan, you talked a little bit about kind of the contrasting ways that the Dutch and Austrians and Poles dealt with culpability, right? And we know law and justice, the Polish government is really active in managing how scholarship is produced that looks at how Poles collaborated and were perpetrators. At least within Jewish spaces, would you guys like to maybe talk about how collaboration of young groups called neighbors, right, was dealt with or kind of expressed, if at all?
So I'm not sure if this quite answers, but at least for what we saw in the physical spaces, just like the mezuzahs being gone, as well as for some reason when you asked the question, I instantly thought of the Schindler's Factory Museum. where, at least in my mind, when we hear about Schindler's List, Schindler's Factory, it's more of a Jewish memorial kind of museum. It was dealt as more of a Polish nationalist remembrance type of victory of World War II. We entered a room that absolutely sickened me, where it was swastika floor panels or tiles on the floor was the entire room. I would describe it as shrines to Hitler in rooms.
Carnival fascism.
Yeah, carnival, and it's definitely, if I came with the idea of, oh, this is a Jewish memorial spot, and the entire thing is dedicated to Polish in World War II, or Polish citizens World War II, and it kind of has one small area dedicated to Schindler's List, or Schindler's Factory, Schindler's List.
Yeah, you go thinking you're going to learn about Schindler and what he did for the Jews, and the entire museum is more of like the German occupation and the Nazis and all of like the things related to that. And then they have like the little tiny sections in between that talk about Schindler and the Jews. And it's just, it's very strange. When we talked about it, that you could just tell the difference between like the presentation of the rooms in the building.
If I can add to that really quick, I was very mad once I saw that. I was kind of tuned out, but there was a tour in front of us. The Krakow ghetto walls have arches on top, which kind of do resemble Jewish cemetery and tombstones and everything. A tour guide described them as, well, I guess the Nazis just really like their arches, and said that there is a controversial idea in the Jewish community that these are made to look like Jewish tombstones, which at that point everything just, I was kind of like, I'm not wanting to really experience this anymore type of thing.
30 minutes earlier. Oh,
Are you going to talk about stuff you do?
yeah, I was going to mention the guy just dressed like Goebbels, just like taking selfies with, well, not selfies, he and his friend, would stand in front of the Nazi flags that they have displaying down in the Schindler's Factory, and they would just smile and take a photo, each of them, and just had a smirk the entire time. But that was obviously very disgusting. But going back to Jan Gross and neighbors, one of the things that we saw specifically within the, I believe it was the Polish exhibit in Auschwitz,
Yes.
the use of language in presenting the Holocaust, especially the equating of the Katyn massacre, which was about a death toll of about 15,000 Polish, 1950, around that, equating that to Auschwitz, to the millions of deaths in the Holocaust. And that was one thing that was like, that's not right. And Amber actually prepared us for this before we went over. But current Polish politics has an interest in sort of downplaying their role as perpetrators within the Holocaust, and really uplifting any sort of stories of, hey, we helped Jewish people, we helped here, here, and here, so we're going to memorialize that. But any scholar who kind of speaks out against like Polish historiography, it's has not a criminal charge, or at least a hefty fine. Criminal charge. I'm trying to think how often we saw any pushback to Jan Gross there in Poland, but it was something that we were keenly aware of while we were there.
I do know that there was an exhibit or a small piece of the Poland Museum to the Joanna pogrom that we had read about in Neighbors, and being able to read that prior to leaving for the trip was very helpful to understand the surrounding context and the event itself, and being able to see those artifacts and pictures and things like that was very touching as well.
Right, we probably have time for one more question.
Whenever it came to the cemeteries, there was one that was like completely overrun with plants and like moss and everything. Why doesn't anyone clean them up?
There's not many people who remain who just kind of have that ability to dedicate that amount of time, because these cemeteries are massive. Like, if you think about the Hayes Cemetery, I mean, that's just a drop in the bucket. And they are over I mean, we could see just like leaves, fallen branches, and the effort
Tombstones
that it would
on
take.
top of tombstones.
Yeah,
Just thrown in the middle of the walkway. You have to walk around them.
Yeah.
They're broken. Some of you can't even like see. They're covered up so badly. So it's just like it would take a lot of work and time.
I think some context too is if you don't know that people would take Jewish tombstones and use them as pavement for cobblestone brick or for roads. So part of that is they have to take it from the road and then find a place to put it as well on top of renovations. And the Jewish population in Poland has been there for hundreds of years as well.
I mean, there are some, like, each of the cemeteries that we went to had a very small crew of people who are just trying to maintain what they have. So there is at least some modicum of effort, but unfortunately it's just not something that's really being focused on. It's unfortunate.
And we saw just a few instances of people who maybe have family in the area or family that we understand is buried in that cemetery who have claimed their gravestones and kept them, maintained and things like that, but being able to see the stark difference of those very white clean tombstones next to the overgrown and broken down was not only a stark difference but also added to the sadness that you feel as you walk by.
And to kind of like build on that a little bit, there's a couple also logistical reasons. The first one is that a majority of the population, Jewish population, was murdered during the Holocaust by the Nazis and their collaborators. The second one is the way that Jewish cemeteries are run is different than the way that maybe you think about a contemporary American cemetery being run. So like in the American context, you usually buy like a plot of land and that's your piece of land. And as part of that purchase, you're essentially paying the cemetery to take care of the property. Whereas in Jewish communities, the Jewish community comes together as a whole to make sure that everybody from the Jewish community has a space of burial. And so once that community is gone, there's no like commercial enterprise that is responsible for keeping it going. And then the final thing is, students learned about this a little bit, but Jewish religious practice is very adamant that bodies not be disturbed and that the body be returned to the ground as quick as possible. So like they use simple wood coffins, for example, because you're supposed to return to the dirt as soon as possible. And Christian communities have really struggled with interpreting this. Like how much should we intervene? How much should we not? And this turns out in a couple different ways. So for example, Nathan probably could tell a story about the flowers. For example,
Yes.
if you want to take over.
So for flowers, again, I talked about it's more about Christian idea of memorizing the dead than stones for Jewish people. Then in the cemetery went to in thank you. Sorry, I blanked. They opened it up for the National Holocaust remembrance, and the community comes out and puts flowers on. Which of course isn't a Jewish practice, but it is some semblance of trying to remember or bring two communities together. This is not an active Jewish cemetery either. So they put these, they say they allow it to kind of unite the communities together, as well as this is their way of showing remembrance. And then other memorials, we saw people putting flowers, this is the community's effort to memorialize, but at the same time it's not quite Jewish.
And it's actually slightly an affront in Jewish culture to lay flowers. You're supposed to not lay anything that can die. This is why they use rocks, because it's permanent and it doesn't die. But they chose to keep the flowers there regardless. So it's an interesting, example of interaction between something that's profoundly missing and the ways in which the people who fill those spaces interact with them. All right, I think that's it. We'll be around for a few more minutes if you want to ask folks questions one-on-one. And then, of course, I always like to use this as a chance to plug study abroad. You should take advantage of study abroad opportunities whenever they come up. It will change your life. The first time I went abroad was a life changer, and I'm sure all of these guys will agree as well.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up, and a round of applause for these students. And